The U.S. Fed raises its interest rate by a quarter percentage point despite recent bank failures as its fight against inflation continues and it believes the banking system is safe. And the baby step gives some relief for South Korea, but it still widens the rate gap between the two countries. What does it mean for the Bank of Korea's own rate decision next month? And dusty air covers the nation as severe yellow dust flows in from China. Good afternoon. The U.S. Fed has raised its interest rate by 25 basis points. That is a middle ground decision between a half-point hike and no increase, largely projected by watchers. The move comes as the Fed continues its fight against inflation, albeit not too aggressively, to avoid other bank failures. Our Lee Dae-yeon has our top story.
The U.S. Federal Reserve takes another baby step. The central bank on Wednesday raised its short-term borrowing rate by 0.25 percentage points as they continue efforts to bring down inflation. This comes despite concerns that previous rate increases helped trigger the nation's banking crisis. The rate hike brings the Fed's policy rate to the 4.75% to 5% range, the highest since October 2007. The Fed pointed to modest growth in spending and production as one of the reasons for imposing another hike. It also added that an unemployment rate hasn't remained low amid job gains in recent months, while inflation remains elevated. The Fed also rejected concerns about the financial system, saying that the U.S. banking system is sound and resilient.
We will continue to closely monitor conditions in the banking system and are prepared to use all of our tools, as needed, to keep it safe and sound. In addition, we are committed to learning the lessons from this episode and to work to prevent events like this from happening again.
As banks rely on a central source of capital, the rapid rise in interest rates tanked the value of bonds held by Silicon Valley Bank, causing the bank's failure. Because of this, there have been speculation from some experts that the central bank might not impose another rate hike following global concerns about bank stability. The Fed has been pushing on with its aggressive campaign to tame inflation, raising the rate by 75 basis points 4 times in a row last year. Although hikes had slowed down last December and February, analysts prior to the SVB crisis had suggested the need for another giant step as inflation once again crept up and a boost in employment figures. But once SVB collapsed, experts say this 25 basis points increase is a middle ground decision for the Fed. The central bank meanwhile left the door open for further rate increases, noting that additional policy firming may be appropriate to lower inflation to the Fed's 2% target. Policymakers expect rates to tick higher this year, with the benchmark rate peaking at 5.1% by the end of 2023. Lee Dae-yeon, Arirang News.
And the baby step gives some relief for South Korea, but it still widens the rate gap between the two countries. What does it mean for the Bank of Korea's own rate decision next month? Our Lee Soo-jin reports.
The Fed's most recent decision on rates has somewhat mitigated worries for the Bank of Korea. That's according to Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho during Thursday's emergency economic meeting attended by other financial officials, including the governor of the Bank of Korea, Lee Chang-yong. The Bank of Korea can rest somewhat more easily with the news that the U.S. Central Bank has pushed its benchmark interest rate up by 0.25 percentage points. On the back of the FOMC decision, the BOK may once again keep the key interest rate at the current level of 3.5% as it continues to monitor economic conditions. Adding to this view is the Consumer Price Index growth falling to the 4% range in February for the first time in 10 months. The Fed, however, may continue to push rates higher if needed. The Fed's rate hike of 25 basis points brought the benchmark rate to the 4.75% to 5% range, leaving some concerns about the 1.25 to 1.50 percentage points gap in key interest rates between South Korea and the U.S. The 1.50 percentage points gap is the highest since October 2000. And that gap will widen to 1.75 percentage points if the Fed decides to hike interest rates by only 25 basis points in May, and the BOK decides to once again keep interest rates unchanged at its next policy meeting in April. There are also still concerns regarding the global economy, even though the domestic financial market remains stable as a whole.
As we cannot completely rule out the possibilities of instability in the global financial market and a greater uncertainty in the real economy during the process of adjusting to a tight monetary policy environment, we will continue to closely and carefully monitor the current situation.
The BOK may also have no choice but to consider raising rates if the Korean won falls below the psychological threshold of 1,300 won against the US dollar once again, which pushes up the prices of important goods. 이수진, Arirang News.
Staying with the domestic economy, South Korea saw a drop in domestic stock funds following the recent collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. According to Korea exchanges of Monday, the total value of stock funds came to around $101.8 billion US dollars. That's down 1.8% from March 10th when SVB's failure was first reported. Since the bank's collapse, foreign investors dumped over $1 billion worth of stocks in the country's benchmark Kospi and tech-heavy Kosdaq. Speaking on Thursday, South Korea's Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho said investors remain fearful of further banking crises and pledged round-the-clock monitoring and a prompt response if necessary. Turning over to North Korea, Pyongyang has launched a series of provocations against the ongoing Seoul-Washington joint drills, and it fired yet another round of missiles a day before drills come to an end. Our Kim Mo-kyun tells us more.
South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff says that North Korea begun firing several cruise missiles from its Hamhung area at around 10:15 a.m. on Wednesday. Authorities are analyzing further details, while sources say there were likely long-range strategic cruise missiles, also known as the North's version of Washington's Tomahawk. Wednesday's launch comes amid Seoul and Washington's combined Freedom Shield exercise, as well as the concurrent field training exercise called the Warrior Shield. The launches are seen as an act of protest by the North. Following the launch, Seoul's military said through a press release that it will successfully wrap up the Freedom Shield and continue to carry out the Warrior Shield in a high-intensity manner. It also added that the military has been on close watch of the regime and its movements, though they cannot reveal all the details. The latest launch also comes just 3 days after North Korea fired a short-range ballistic missile into the East Sea during what it claimed to be tactical nuclear counterattack drills. Pundits are now on the watch for further provocative actions from Pyongyang as the joint 11-day Freedom Shield exercise is set to end on Thursday. Kim Mo-kyun, Arirang News.
For the first time in 5 years, South Korea joins the UN Human Rights Council as a co-sponsor for its upcoming resolution on North Korea's human rights abuses. According to Yonhap News, citing multiple diplomatic sources, Seoul is among the list of countries that took part in discussions to draw up the preliminary resolution led by the EU. Similar resolutions have been adopted for the past 20 years in a row, but South Korea did not co-sponsor them for 4 straight years since 2019 in consideration of inter-Korean peace efforts. Among the new concerns cited in this year's preliminary resolution are the regime's ban of foreign cultural contents and its inhumane treatment of foreign detainees. The finalized resolution will be submitted to a session slated for later this month. Over in France, protests continue over the controversial pension reform plan. But President Emmanuel Macron refuses to back down as he stays committed to pushing ahead with raising the pension age this year. Our Kim Do-yeon with this report.
In Paris, some streets are in flames as protesters on Wednesday ramp up their show of discontent over pension reforms. This is a response to French President Emmanuel Macron saying that he's adamant about raising the country's retirement age from 62 to 64 by the year 2030, despite the public anger.
As I speak to you right now, do you think I enjoy doing this reform? No. Do you think I could have done the same as many others before me and swept the dust under the rug? Yes, maybe. But the reality is today there's one thing I regret. It's that we weren't able to inform of the constraints and more specifically the need to undergo this reform.
While the protests were largely peaceful when President Macron first proposed the plan, but following his decision to push the bill through without a parliamentary vote last week and subsequently surviving 2 no-confidence votes, the situation in parts of the country has gone downhill. And Macron on Wednesday faced the cameras for the first time since then, where he said he understood the public's anger but condemned violent protests. But above all, he made it clear that the system has to be changed.
When I entered into my working life, there were 10 million retirees. Now there are 17 million. In the 2030s, there will be 20 million. Do you think that we can continue with the same laws?
The bill is now in the hands of the French Constitutional Council or the country's constitutional court. The judges will be looking into the law over the coming weeks, and it can only be passed with their approval. Macron says the bill needs to be enacted before the end of the year. In the meantime, French unions have announced more protests and called for people to join in. High-speed and regional trains, the Paris Metro, and other public transportation in major cities were expected to be disrupted. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Back here at home, amid a declining population, South Korea's fertility rate dropped to an all-time low last year. Our Moon area has the details.
For 2 consecutive years, the country's population has been falling. This is according to the annual report on Korean society released by Statistics Korea on Thursday, which showed that the total population fell by 117,000 last year, going from around 51,745,000 in 2021 to around 51,628,000 in 2022. The country's low fertility rate is the biggest contributor to this decline. In 2022, the fertility rate in Korea, the average number of children a woman is expected to have in her lifetime, dipped below 0.8 for the first time since data was first compiled in 1970. Standing at 0.78, it's less than half the average birth rate across the 38 OECD countries, which is 1.59. Statistics Korea attributed this to the decline in the number of new marriages throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. However, it wasn't just the pandemic that put marriages on hold. According to a survey conducted by Statistics Korea, fewer and fewer people are feeling like they need to get married. In 2010, nearly 65% of the population aged 13 and over felt that marriage was a necessity, but in 2022, this had fallen to 50%. The social trend of fewer people wanting to get married and have children was reflected in the average number of people per household. The size of households in 2021 fell to an average of 2.3 people per household, and the percentage of households with 3 or more people also fell. In 2010, more than half the country's households were made up of 3 or more people. In 2021, this accounted for just 38% of households. Meanwhile, more people are feeling happier with their current lifestyle and fewer people are feeling lonely. At the start of the COVID-19 outbreak in 2020, only 61.6% of citizens responded that they were satisfied with their current lifestyle. Last year, this rose to 75.4%. Similarly, while the percentage of people feeling lonely in 2020 hit 22.3%, this fell to 19.2% in 2022. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
As China sees its worst yellow dust of the year, murky air covers the Korean peninsula, with the dust expected to linger into Friday. Lee Seung-jae has more.
A cloud of dust covers the Chinese capital city of Beijing. Drivers turned on their headlights even during the day, and people are wearing their face masks throughout the city. On Wednesday, the air quality in Beijing reached hazardous levels, with the main pollutant being fine dust. And it didn't help that China is also experiencing the worst yellow dust of the year, originating from the Gobi Desert. Starting Thursday, that yellow dust is headed to South Korea. With northwest winds carrying the yellow dust, Incheon and Gyeonggi-do province are under a yellow dust advisory. The Ministry of the Environment on Wednesday issued an advisory at attention, the lowest of 4 levels. High levels of yellow dust are expected to hit Seoul, North Chungcheong-do province, and Jeollabuk-do province by Thursday afternoon, with Jeollanam-do and Gangwon-do provinces expected to be hit with the yellow dust by evening. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo called on relevant ministries to make sure measures are put in place to protect people in the country. He also called on the people to check that windows are closed properly and refrain from any outdoor activities. Elderly citizens are especially asked to stay indoors. Experts say with factories in China in full operation after the lifting of its zero-COVID policy, high concentrations of heavy metal could be brought in along with the yellow dust. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea imported the most amount of seafood from Japan last year since the Fukushima nuclear accident. Korea Customs Service on Thursday said $170 million of seafood was imported from Japan. Since 2019, Japanese seafood imports have been on the rise, but they're still only around 80% of what they were in 2010, just before an earthquake led to the nuclear accident. The volume of the imports is still at 40% of 2010 levels, but the rise in value comes as more live fish, which are more expensive than other seafood, are being imported. In fact, nearly half of the import value came from live fish. South Korea still has an import ban on seafood from 8 Japanese prefectures, including Fukushima. Water shortages are a global problem here in South Korea, including here in South Korea. And as we marked World Water Day yesterday, our Song Yoo-jin explains the gravity of the issue and what we can do to help.
Water is life. It makes up almost 70% of our bodies. But it's not just about staying hydrated and healthy. Water is also essential for energy, food production, and healthy ecosystems. In 2015, the world set an ambitious goal to provide everyone with clean water and sanitation by 2030. With less than a decade to go, we're still facing a dire shortage in terms of both quantity and quality. As of 2021, 2 billion people lacked access to safe drinking water, and 1.4 million die every year due to poor water quality.
The problems are related to decades of misuse and also poor management and over-extraction of groundwater and contamination of freshwater resources. And if you think about the current mega trends of urbanization, population growth, and also industrialization, and together with now natural cause, for example, climate change, those are now making things even worse.
As for South Korea, hygiene is not an issue, but the amount of water available is a problem.
We're grappling with severe droughts except for during the monsoon season. The amount of rain per day has not changed significantly, but we're seeing fewer rainy days.
Then, what can we do about this water crisis?
We don't need to have more technologies more. Perhaps we need to pay more attention to how the people, they think about the water issues more fundamentally, and how to also to change their consumption behaviors and also the industrial restructuring in terms of using less water.
The government should devise ways to educate people of the importance of conserving and managing water.
But it's not just up to governments. We can all play a part in our daily lives. And because 90% of power generation is water intensive, you can start by turning off unused devices while you sleep. Shop sustainably, buy food you'll actually eat. That's because reducing food waste reduces demand on agriculture, one of the biggest consumers of water. For example, it takes about 3,000 to 5,000 liters of water to make up 1 kilogram of rice. Finally, share your efforts on social media with the hashtag World Water Day. Generate debates, raise awareness, and inspire others to take action. Be the change you want to see in the world. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Afghanistan and Pakistan, an earthquake has killed over a dozen people. At least 19 people have been killed and over 200 have been injured after a 6.5 magnitude earthquake struck the northern regions of Afghanistan and Pakistan on Tuesday, local time. At least 10 of those who died were in Afghanistan, and the total death toll is expected to rise as rescue teams in both countries work to find survivors. The quake triggered landslides and caused some buildings to collapse. Some tremors were even felt in India, as well as in the Afghan capital, Kabul, and Pakistani capital, Islamabad. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, the earthquake was recorded at 187 kilometers deep, and its center was 40 kilometers southeast of the Afghan town of Jurm. The quake came at a time when many families were outside their homes celebrating Nowruz, the Persian New Year. Moving on to Scotland now, where 35 people have been injured after a ship tipped over. Strong winds dislodged the ship from its holdings at Edinburgh's Imperial Dock on Wednesday morning local time. Among those injured, 23 were sent to hospital, with some in serious condition. 12 others were treated at the scene. Pictures show the 3,000-ton U.S. Navy research vessel Petrel leaning at a 45-degree angle in the dry dock. The U.S. consulate in Edinburgh has said it is offering support to U.S. citizens involved and that it's monitoring the situation. It also thanked local emergency services for their quick response. Meanwhile, a museum in the Austrian capital of Vienna is drawing awareness to climate change by hanging its paintings askew. The Leopold Museum has opened a new exhibit titled A Few Degrees More, where 15 paintings by the likes of Gustav Klimt and Egon Schiele have been tilted by a few degrees. The number of degrees tilted reflects the number of temperature degree changes expected at locations depicted in each of the paintings. The exhibit comes just a few months after the same museum was targeted by members of the climate activist group Last Generation. Activists threw black oily liquid on a Klimt painting protected by glass, with one even gluing themselves to the glass. And finally, the world's oldest near-complete Bible has gone on display in a museum in Israel. Viewable in the Museum of the Jewish People, the leather-bound, handwritten manuscript is believed to have been made around the year 900. It contains almost all of the Hebrew Bible and is called the Codex Sassoon, after its previous owner, David Solomon Sassoon. The display of the Bible comes before it's set to be auctioned by Sotheby's in New York in May. There, it's expected to go under the hammer for an estimated $30 to $50 million US. If it sells close to its estimated value, it could become the most valuable historical document ever sold. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Right after the rain goes away, it's yellow dust that's now covering most of the western regions, pushing air quality to very bad levels again in Korea's western port city Incheon all day, while the capital and Chungcheong-namdo province will see severe levels from this afternoon. The south coast has been seeing heavier rainfall. Coastlines along the Gyeongsangdo provinces will see up to 40 millimeters of rain. In southern parts of the country, we'll see 5 to 20 millimeters until late this afternoon. Seoul saw the record-breaking March warms yesterday at 25.1 degrees. While temperatures stay on the warmer side today in the capital before returning to near norms tomorrow. And it is so unfortunate that those of us in the western parts of the country could not fully enjoy the warmth for the last couple of days due to that very bad dust levels. But air quality should improve a bit tomorrow with cold northwesterly winds. Then typical early spring weather is in the forecast with wide gaps in temperatures. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of the day.